I was halfway through a bottle of gas station Merlot, sitting on my apartment floor in Santa Fe, surrounded by unopened Christmas cards and a week's worth of laundry I had no intention of doing. That's when I opened the envelope, and everything changed. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single page, written in the unmistakable sharp, slanted handwriting of Laurel Vega. Laurel had been dead for 6 months. The letter must have been written before the mission. Before the Humvee flipped, before I carried her body on a stretcher through the dirt. And before I had to stand at attention while some PR officer gave her mother a folded flag and 3 bullet casings like they meant something. I read the letter once, then again. Marin, if you're reading this, I'm probably not around to argue with you about it, so here goes. You don't owe anyone any except maybe yourself. If you still have anyone left to go home to, do it. Say what needs to be said. Don't let silence be your legacy. Silence. That part hit harder than it should have because silence was pretty much all I'd had from my family for the past 3 years. Silence from my mom, Janice, who hadn't called since I came home on leave and didn't make it through Christmas dinner without flinching every time I dropped a fork. Silence from my sister, Mallory, who somehow managed to update Facebook 5 times a day but couldn't return a single text. And silence from my hometown of Bridal Hollow, Indiana, population too small to forget your worst moment. That silence was earned. Not because I did something unforgivable, but because I didn't do what they expected. I didn't become a nurse like Mom wanted. I didn't marry a high school sweetheart like Mallory. I joined the army, was shipped off to Iraq, and came back with more nightmares than matching dishes. And they hated it. Not openly. Not dramatically. Just enough to let it eat at me slowly, like water damage behind wallpaper. Laurel was the only person who never tiptoed around my trauma. She made bad jokes about landmines. She once gave me a birthday cake shaped like a grenade. We were in the same unit for 2 deployments, and she knew things about me no one in Bridal Hollow ever wanted to. And now she was gone and still the only one saying anything that mattered. I looked around my apartment. 2 plates in the sink. 1 dying houseplant. A coffee table I'd assembled with duct tape and prayer. And that letter, sitting in my lap like it knew I wasn't fooling anyone. I didn't make a decision. I just got up and started packing. The next morning, I called my dad. He picked up on the 3rd ring, sounding like he'd been up since dawn. Probably had. Douglas Quinn ran on caffeine, hardware store sawdust, and pure Midwestern guilt. Dad, it's me. Marin? Like he hadn't saved my number. Classic. Yeah, I was thinking of coming home for Christmas. Long pause. Not dramatic, just surprised. I'd like that, he said. You'd still be welcome here. Still, that word stung a little more than it should have. Like I was some maybe. I packed my car the next night, rented a place halfway between 2 rest stops, and told no one but Dad. I didn't text Mallory. I didn't post a thing online. No inspirational quote. No taking time to reconnect post. Just me, my overpacked duffel, and a playlist full of angry country songs I never admitted I liked. 6 hours into the drive, I pulled over at a sketchy diner with burnt coffee and a lady behind the counter who called me honey, as she meant. I sat in a booth alone and thought about turning around. But then I looked down at Laurel's letter again. The corner was bent from how many times I'd refolded it, the ink was smudged, and I'd pressed my thumb too hard. I wasn't going home because I missed them. I went home because I needed them to know they didn't break me. Not the way they hoped. Not the way they thought I'd crawl back, apologizing for not being their version of successful. I just wanted one dinner where I didn't feel like a ghost at my table. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or if you've been the one who left and everyone made sure you remembered it, leave a comment. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. There's more than one way to be heard. The sky turned darker as I crossed the Indiana state line. Bridal Hollow hadn't changed. Same gas stations. Same 2 stoplights. Same judgmental church signs with Bible verses that seemed weirdly personal. And the same house on Maple Drive with the porch light always on. I turned into the driveway and sat for a minute, engine running, gift bags in the back seat, palms sweating. I was wearing my only winter coat, a military-issued one I hadn't thrown out yet. My boots were caked with Santa Fe dirt. I looked at the house and didn't feel nostalgia. I felt something else. Like I was stepping into a place I knew I didn't belong. I killed the engine and sat there long enough for the windshield to fog over. The porch light blinked, steady and fake, cheerful, like it hadn't seen anything worth remembering in years. My fingers gripped the steering wheel like I was still waiting for permission. Not from them. From myself. 3 years ago, I'd stood in this exact driveway. Different car, same tight chest. I had just gotten back from my first deployment. It was December then, too. I'd been home for 48 hours and still couldn't sleep without the sound of diesel engines playing in my head. Mallory had messaged me exactly once that week. Not, "Can't wait to see you." Not, "How are you holding up?" Just, "Mom's making pot roast, don't be late." Classic Quinn hospitality. So I showed up. I wore a black sweater that made me look normal, like someone who hadn't just watched a convoy get lit up outside Kirkuk. I brought a bottle of wine that nobody opened and a box of artisan cookies that Mallory later told people I probably bought at an airport. That night, I sat at the table while my mother kept asking me if I was still adjusting, like PTSD was a light switch I hadn't flipped off yet. She flinched like I might snap whenever my fork scraped the plate too hard, like I was a ticking clock with no hands. Then I dropped a glass. It wasn't a big deal. It barely cracked. But Mom stood up so fast you'd think I fired a weapon. She whispered something to my dad, left the table, and returned with a broom and a smile so tight it could cut glass. The next day, I left 2 days early. Nobody asked why. A week later, I texted Mallory. "Sorry if I made things weird, I'm working on it." She left me on red. That was the last time I reached out. Nobody called after that. Not when I re-enlisted. Not when I got promoted. Not when I had a panic attack in the middle of a grocery store in El Paso and couldn't drive for 2 hours. Not even when Laurel died. Especially not then. I remember sitting alone on my bathroom floor with my phone and her obituary in one hand. I had thought maybe someone would at least text. Not a full call. Not a visit. Just a message saying, "Heard what happened, you okay?" But nothing came. They weren't cruel. They just weren't curious. Mom once told me, "We don't know how to help you when you shut down." That was her excuse for disappearing every time I was struggling. But the truth is, I never shut down. I just stopped performing pain in a way that made them comfortable. I wasn't quiet. I was tired of translating. I took a deep breath and looked at the house. Same brown shutters. Same sagging porch swing. The kind of place that looks stable from the road but creaks when you lean on it too long. I could see shadows moving inside. The kitchen light was on. Mallory is microwaving something for her kids and lecturing them about posture. My hands felt numb, even with the heater blasting. It was funny. I'd been through dust storms, shell fire, and sleeping upright in a Humvee, but nothing made my stomach drop like the idea of walking into that dining room again. A part of me still wanted this to work. Still wanted someone to say they were glad I came back. That they missed me, even if they didn't understand me. But wanting that didn't make it accurate. I wiped the window with my sleeve and grabbed the first bag off the passenger seat. It was the one with the wooden toys I picked out for my niece and nephew. Handmade, non-toxic, overpriced. The kind of gift you give when trying too hard to prove you know what being a good person looks like. I stepped out into the cold. Not dramatic, just cold enough to sting. My boots crunched over old snow that had been salted, shoveled, and walked on too many times, like me. The porch light flickered again as I climbed the steps. My hand hovered over the doorbell. For a second, I thought about walking away. Just leaving the gifts, texting Dad later, and pretending this trip was never about them and that it was just closure. But I rang it anyway, because deep down, I wasn't here to escape anything. I was here to finish what they started. The door opened before my hand even dropped from the bell. I didn't know what I expected, maybe my dad's face, my mom faking a surprised smile, but it wasn't Mallory. She stood in the doorway in full holiday mom mode. Hair curled, makeup done, wearing one of those boutique sweaters that said "Merry Everything" in gold letters like that solved anything. Her arms were crossed, but her face said she'd been waiting for this moment just to enjoy, not enjoying it. Her eyes landed on me. Then, the gift bags. Then back to me. "Why are you even here?" Not a question. More like a warning wrapped in passive aggression. The kind of sentence that didn't leave space for a good answer, just a short walk back to the car. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I just looked at her, then past her, into the hallway, where I could hear voices, laughter, and the clink of silverware on china. Someone was telling a story, probably Brandon, my cousin, the only one in the family allowed to be funny without it being called acting out. I stepped back a little, trying not to slip on the porch. The bags in my hand suddenly felt like props from the wrong play. Mallory didn't move. I cleared my throat. "Dad invited me." "Of course he did," she muttered. "But that doesn't mean this was a good idea." I let that hang. I wasn't going to argue on the porch. I wouldn't beg to be let in like I was asking to use the restroom at a restaurant I didn't order food from. Instead, I nodded. Got it. Then I turned around, walked back down the steps, and reached the car before the panic hit. I threw the bags in the passenger seat and shut the door harder than I meant to. The car wasn't cold inside, but I couldn't stop shaking. I sat there for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. Engine off. Radio off. My hands gripped the wheel like I was about to drive into enemy territory. I should have left. I told myself I should leave. I had a reservation at a motel off Route 47 that looked exactly like the kind of place where someone dies in a true crime podcast. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. "Almost ready for pie. You close?" I stared at it. So casual. Like I hadn't just been told to disappear at his front door. I didn't reply. I couldn't make myself type out, "Hey, your daughter said I'm not welcome, so I guess I'll eat stale vending machine snacks instead of sweet potato casserole." I stared at the porch. The door was shut now. Mallory had vanished. Maybe she was inside laughing about it. Maybe she was still standing there, waiting to see if I had the nerve to return. And maybe I didn't. But then I remembered the phone call 2 days ago. I'd been at my desk, ignoring a spreadsheet at work, when my dad called out of nowhere. He never called during work hours. When I picked up, his voice cracked like it hadn't in years. "Your mom's been baking. Your grandmother's asking about you. It'd mean a lot if you came." I didn't believe him at the time, but I wanted to. That's the problem with hope. It's always showing up uninvited. I didn't text him back. I stayed in the car, listening to my breath and the creak of cold plastic as the dashboard settled. Every part of me wanted to turn the key and leave. Pride, logic, history, they were all screaming to go. But that letter from Laurel was still in my jacket pocket. Folded small, worn at the edges, like a reminder I hadn't earned yet. I reached for the door handle. Not because I wanted in. Not because I needed their validation. But because if I didn't walk back up those steps, Mallory would win. And I was done letting her write the ending. I opened the car door like it might bite me. The wind slapped me in the face the second I stepped out. Indiana in December doesn't care about your feelings. I adjusted my jacket, grabbed the gift bags again, and returned across the street like I was marching into court with a guilty plea. The porch steps creaked loud enough to make me feel like I was being watched. The porch light is still blinking. The same half-dead wreath from years ago hanging crooked on the door. I raised my hand again, this time not hesitating. I knocked. Twice. Not timid. Not aggressive. Just enough to say I wasn't sneaking in. The door opened again. This time, it was my dad. Douglas Quinn looked like he hadn't aged a day since I left, which made it worse. He still had the same red flannel, the same weather-beaten hands, the same mix of guilt and relief on his face. "Marin," he said, stepping aside. "Come on in." He didn't hug me. My family isn't the hugging type. But his voice had that softness that only showed up after someone died or won a softball tournament. I walked in. The smell hit first: roast turkey, cinnamon, something sweet that might have been my grandmother's infamous pecan pie. The kind of smell that used to mean comfort. Now, it felt like someone else's memory. The house looked the same. Same beige carpet, same dusty mirror in the hallway. Same photos on the wall, including the one from Mallory's wedding that Mom still insists is the best day we ever had as a family. Mallory was nowhere in sight. My mom was in the kitchen, slicing something with surgical precision. She looked up, made brief eye contact, and gave me the smile she reserved for funeral receptions. "Oh, you made it." That was it. No hug. No. "You look good." Just the verbal equivalent of someone opening a door for a stranger holding a pizza. "I did," I said. "Nice to see you, Mom." She turned back to the cutting board without replying. I stood there for a second, still holding the bags, until Dad gestured toward the tree in the corner of the living room. "You can put those under there," he said. "Kids will love whatever you brought." I crouched down, set the bags gently beneath the tree, and took a breath that felt heavier than it should have. The tree looked like it came straight out of a department store catalog: perfect lights, matching ornaments, no trace of the glitter-covered disasters Mallory and I used to make in elementary school. I guess we stopped being sentimental when she became Pinterest certified. I stood up, turned around, and came face to face with Brandon. My cousin. Taller than I remembered, same smug grin. "Hey stranger," he said, offering a handshake like we were closing a deal. "Didn't think we'd see you this year." "Didn't think I'd come," I replied. "Bold choice," he muttered, low enough that only I could hear. His wife, Jess, waved from the couch. She was always lovely and genuine, but also trying to prove it. Their kids were in the corner, glued to a tablet with too high volume. I waved. They didn't look up. I moved toward the dining room. The table was already set. China plates, crystal glasses, candles lit like this was the Queen's brunch. I took the empty chair farthest from Mallory's usual spot. No one told me where to sit, so I picked the one that gave me a view of the door. Dad sat across from me. Jess wrangled the kids. Brandon opened a bottle of wine that looked expensive enough to make Mom twitch. Mallory entered the room like nothing had happened. She didn't look at me. She sat down, folded her napkin like she was prepping for a TED Talk, and smiled at everyone else. Dinner started. Small talk. Work. Gas prices. Somebody's neighbor's dog had puppies. The kind of conversation that could go on forever without anyone saying anything. I kept my mouth shut. At one point, Mallory leaned over to Jess and said loud enough for me to hear, "I just don't understand how people can live that far away from family. Like, what's the point?" Jess glanced at me, then back at her plate. Nobody said anything. My dad cleared his throat and offered me the mashed potatoes. I nodded, took them, and passed them without a word. I felt like a foreign exchange student at my family table. When dessert came out, Mom placed it on the table with a flourish. "Pecan pie," she said. "Edna's recipe. You remember, Marin?" I nodded. "Of course. She used to make it every year," Mom continued, before we all got too busy." Mallory cut in. "Some of us make time, Mom." I didn't flinch. Not even a blink. I was too busy gripping my fork like it might snap. The pie smelled like home. It didn't taste like it. I set the fork down before I bent it in half. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just decided to pretend they didn't. That was the Quinn family's specialty treat. Everything awkward like a squeaky floorboard. Walk around it and hope no one steps too hard. I took a sip of water to have something to do with my hands. My dad gave me a small smile from across the table, the kind that said, "Hang in there," even if he didn't say it out loud. I couldn't tell if that helped or made it worse. Mom cleared her throat and looked around the table, scanning for someone to aim at. "So," she said, "Mallory tells me the kids are in a new school now." Mallory perked up immediately like someone hit a button on her back. Yes. Finally, a district that doesn't tolerate mediocrity. Brandon made a sarcastic slight cough that sounded like, wow, and Jess kicked him under the table. I had to bite my cheek to keep from smiling. Mallory turned to me for the first time since the porch. How's your job, Marin? Still with that digital firm? Sundial Strategies, I said. Yeah. I'm leading a new campaign for a hospitality group. It's going well. Must be strange working in marketing when you used to work with, bombs. I laughed once. Just a slight sound, sharp and dry. Yeah. One teaches you to stay calm under fire. The other teaches you to fake it in meetings. Dad chuckled, grateful for anything resembling a joke. Mom, on the other hand, looked like she smelled sour milk. Well, she said, at least you're using your communication skills. Though I always thought you'd come back and do something more grounded. Maybe teach. I'm grounded, I said. I pay taxes and everything. That earned a few chuckles, mostly from Brandon, who drank more than usual. Mallory kept smiling. That tight, bright, practiced grin meant she was about to say something that sounded sweet but carried enough venom to drop a horse. Do you ever think about coming back? I mean, Santa Fe is so far. And kind of lonely, isn't it? I shrugged. I like having space. Well, I guess everyone needs something different. Some of us like stability, roots. Others like freedom. There it was. The subtle jab. The implication is that I was selfish. Moving away meant abandoning family, not a way of surviving it. I pushed the pie around my plate. It looked better than it tasted. My niece, Emmy, leaned over to me with all the grace of a 6-year-old hyped up on sugar. Mom says you live by yourself 'cause you don't like people. The room froze for a second. I smiled at her. That's only half true. I like you. She giggled. Mallory's face tensed. Score 1 for Aunt Marin. Still, the damage was done. The silence after that moment was louder than anything anyone could have said. Dad tried to pivot. Did you bring that coffee from New Mexico? He asked. Yeah, I said, reaching into the gift bag I'd set aside earlier. Roasted last week. I figured you'd appreciate something stronger than grocery store beans. He grinned and held up the bag like it was a trophy. Now this is a real gift. Mallory glanced at it and muttered, well, not everyone needs caffeine to feel important. Brandon snorted into his wine. Jess changed the subject to the town's holiday parade. Mom leaned into a story about the church choir. Mallory laughed too loudly at something no one else found funny. And I sat there thinking, I could have stayed in Santa Fe. I could have watched bad television, eaten microwave mac and cheese, and not felt drowning in forced cheer and nasty subtext. But I still came. I came with gifts. I came with effort. I came even when no one asked me to. And somehow, sitting in that dining room full of old furniture and passive-aggressive smiles felt like the most radical thing I'd done in years. I reached for the wine as if it might soften the edges. Brandon caught my eye as I poured too much into my glass. He raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. Good man. He'd always been the only family member who knew when to shut up. The conversation shifted to local politics, which was my cue to disappear mentally. I stared at the centerpiece like it might do the trick. A cluster of pine cones, cranberries, and glittered fake snow, arranged to look rustic, but mostly just looked like a Pinterest fail. Mallory was still running the show from her end of the table, coordinating the meal like it was a board meeting. Between bites, she corrected Jess's pronunciation of charcuterie and told Brandon's wife how to reheat pie without ruining the crust. I tuned her out until I heard my name come up. But Marin probably eats takeout most nights, right? Mallory said, stabbing her fork into a green bean like it owed her money. I looked up. Depends. Some nights I just eat rage. Nobody laughed except Brandon, who immediately coughed to cover it. Mallory flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You always were the dramatic one. Right, that's what you call it when someone tells the truth, I said, sipping the wine. Mom sighed. One of those long, theatrical sighs that said, "Why do you always have to be like this?" She leaned in with her, "I'm still your mother" voice. "Can't we just have one nice meal without sarcasm?" "Sure," I said. "But then we'd have to stop talking." The knife clinked too hard against her plate. She said nothing. Across the table, Emmy was staring at me like I was on television. She looked down at her plate, then back at me. "Mom says you used to be in the army," she said. Mallory froze. Jess looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. "Yeah," I told her. "I was." "Did you shoot people?" That one landed like a grenade. Everyone froze, forks midair, mouths slightly open. Before anyone could scold her, I answered. "I hope not," I said. "But I got shot at. A lot." Her eyes got huge. "Did it hurt?" "Only the boring parts." She laughed. Mallory didn't. "Emmy," she said, with that tight mom tone, "we don't ask people questions like that." "It's fine," I said. "Better than pretending I work in cloud marketing." Jess finally stepped in. "Hey, Marin, what's Santa Fe like? I've always wanted to go." I smiled at her like she just saved my life. "It's warm, dry. Lots of people wearing hats they don't earn." "Sounds peaceful," she said. "Depends who's asking." Brandon changed the subject again. Bless him, and we coasted into small talk about grocery prices and someone's dog getting sprayed by a skunk. I returned to quietly eating my food, trying not to let my jaw lock up from clenching it. Then my nephew, Leo 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, sugar-sticky hands pointed at me with a fork and said, "Mom says you don't like kids, that's why you never visit." The table went dead silent. Even the dog in the next room stopped walking. I looked at him. "Your mom's not entirely wrong." Mallory gasped like I'd slapped a baby Jesus figurine. "But," I added, "it's not that I don't like kids, it's that I don't like being told I'm only worth something if I make them." Leo shrugged and returned to his mac and cheese like I'd said nothing strange. Mallory leaned in. "What is that supposed to mean?" I met her eyes. "It means you don't get to define my life by how similar it is to yours." She blinked, stunned for a half second, then smirked. "I'm just trying to understand you, Marin." "No, you're not," I said. "You're trying to make me defend myself, again." Mom dropped her napkin. "That's enough." And it was. Not because she said so, but because I didn't have the energy to turn dinner into a landmine map. I pushed my plate back. I wasn't even halfway done. The pie sat there before me, untouched, still looking perfect. I wondered how something could smell like childhood but feel like an obligation. The voices picked back up around me like a switch had been flipped. Brandon started talking about car trouble. Jess laughed too loudly at something Dad said. The kids started arguing over whose turn it was with the tablet. And I sat there, still, hands folded, watching my own family carry on like I was just some guest who hadn't figured out the social cues. Maybe I never did. Maybe I was still looking for them. Or maybe, this time, I wasn't the one out of place. I reached for my water glass just to have something to hold. My hands were starting to shake, not from anger, not even nerves, just that quiet internal buzzing when your body knows you're not safe but can't run. The voices around me kept going, looping through familiar loops. Aunt Marianne was telling the story of how she once dropped a turkey straight on the floor, and no one noticed because she just wiped it off and served it anyway. People laughed. Dad laughed. Mallory laughed. I sipped my water and kept my face still. No one here knew Laurel was dead. I set the glass down slowly. My fingers hovered on the rim. I hadn't said her name aloud in a year. The memory hit like a punch. Brown sand. Blood. My boots slipped on loose gravel. Her body was on top of me because she was the one who noticed the sniper first. Laurel took the bullet meant for me. It went straight through her chest, shattering bone like a hammer to glass. She didn't scream. Her eyes just went dark. 1 second, she was cracking a joke about home. The next, she was gone. I hadn't told anyone here. They wouldn't understand. All they knew was that I had come back from deployment differently. They saw the haircut, the stiffness, the silence. They didn't ask questions because questions would lead to answers they didn't want. They liked pretending I'd just gone on some long trip and returned moody. Across the table, Mallory was now talking about her pregnancy pillow. It was life-changing. I half wished to suffocate myself with it just to end the conversation. Then I heard Dad say something that cut through the static. "Marin had a friend in the service, didn't you? That girl from Louisiana. Laurel?" I looked up, startled. He never mentioned her. Not once. I had told him, years ago, in a phone call he probably half listened to. "Yeah," I said. "We deployed together." Mallory raised an eyebrow. "Didn't she visit you once? You posted a photo." "She did," I said. "That was before Afghanistan." "What happened to her?" Mom asked. Casual. Like she was asking what happened to an old college roommate. I didn't answer right away. I reached for my water again. Brandon noticed the delay. His expression changed just slightly. A flicker of awareness. "She died," I said, finally. "In combat." The room went quiet. "Oh," Mom said. "Just that one word. No follow-up." "No, I'm sorry. As I said, the weather will be cloudy tomorrow." Aunt Marianne blinked. "How awful. Was it quick?" "Quicker than it was for the rest of us," I said, sharper than I meant to. "We had to carry her body for 7 hours because the extraction point was compromised." Mallory made a face. "Do we really need the graphic details at dinner?" Brandon shot her a look. "She's answering a question." "No," Mallory said, setting her fork down. "She's trying to turn this into some kind of war movie monologue. We're trying to have a holiday here." That did it. "You mean the holiday where I got told I wasn't welcome at the door?" I said. "Yeah, sorry I'm ruining the vibe with my dead friend and my inconvenient trauma." "Don't twist my words," she snapped. "I don't have to. You said them plain." Dad cleared his throat. "Let's all just—" "No," I said. "Let's not." I stood up slowly. The scrape of my chair on the floor was louder than anything anyone had said all night. "You all think you know who I am. The screw-up daughter. The angry vet. The bitter sister who didn't choose family. But you don't know a damn thing about what I've seen, about what I've carried." Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. "I didn't come here to be the villain in Mallory's perfect Christmas," I continued. "I came because Dad asked me to. Because I thought maybe 3 years was long enough to pretend we were still a family." Mallory's voice went quiet, dangerous. "You left us." I laughed Aiden's sharp, empty note. "Number you pushed me out and locked the door." And then something shifted. I saw it in Mallory's face. Fear. Not of me, but of the truth. Because deep down, she knew it. All of it. She just never expected me to say it out loud. I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed my plate, walked to the sink, and cleaned it. My stomach had no interest in food anymore. As I turned the water on, I heard Emmy whisper something to Leo. I didn't catch it. Didn't care. But I felt Jess's hand on my arm. Light, human. "Hey," she said, just barely audible. "I'm sorry about your friend." I nodded. It wasn't enough. But it was something. The faucet ran. The sink filled. My fingers stayed under the water just a little too long. And still, no one said Laurel's name. I dried my hands on the dish towel like I tried to scrub the moment off my skin. Behind me, the kitchen still buzzed with low conversation, clinking forks, and that weird tension that sticks to your clothes after someone speaks too much truth. Mallory had vanished to the bathroom the second I sat back down. Dad kept buttering rolls like nothing happened. Grandma Quinn passed around her secret recipe fudge like it was medication. Brandon looked at me once, long enough to mean something, but then turned away again. Mom was the one who finally broke the silence with her favorite tool. Deflection. "Well," she said too loudly. "I think it's time for dessert." Already had it, Grandma said with a smirk, popping a square of fudge into her mouth. But Mom was on a mission. She walked out, returned with a white box tied in a red ribbon, and placed it in front of Mallory's chair. Her eyes sparkled like a magician about to pull a dove out of her sleeve. As Mallory returned from the hall, Mom clapped her hands once. Perfect timing. Mallory blinked. What's this? Open it, honey, Mom said, beaming. I picked up my water glass again. Just held it. Something was coming. Mallory untied the ribbon slowly, always the queen of dramatic pacing. Inside was a pair of tiny white baby booties with red embroidery. Coming summer 2025. Oh my God, Jess gasped. Michael stood behind Mallory now, hands on her shoulders. She placed one over his. We weren't going to say anything until New Year's, she said sweetly, but we're having another baby. The table exploded. It was like someone hit the applause button on a live studio audience. Mom shrieked like someone had proposed. This is the best news. Oh, sweetheart. Grandma started crying, actual tears, and even Dad stood up to hug Michael, clapping him on the back like he'd done something heroic. I sat there and watched the room light up around her. It was almost impressive how cleanly she cut the air back in her direction. No one was asking about Laurel now. No one was worried about tension or PTSD or who belonged at the table. Nope. Mallory was pregnant again. And that made everything shiny and safe. I watched her bask in it. Her perfect manicure rested over her perfectly flat stomach. Her fake humility soaking up compliments like a dry sponge. Michael's dumb smile passed on like a campaign ad. You sure know how to make an entrance, Brandon said with a laugh. Or a comeback, she replied, looking in my direction. It wasn't even subtle. I set my glass down with a quiet thud. Congrats, I said, flat. Another baby. Jess gave me a side glance like she wasn't sure whether to pat my shoulder or duck for cover. 3 kids under 7, I added. That'll be something. Oh, we're ready, Mallory said sweetly. We've been praying for this. And after the year we've had, it's a blessing. Her tone, her posture, and everything else screamed. This is what family looks like. This is who deserves to be here. And that's when it clicked. She didn't just want the attention. She wanted the win. She wanted to cancel out the truth. I'd just dropped by burying it under a Hallmark announcement and a plate of fudge. Mallory didn't just resent me. She needed me to be the outsider. This wasn't a pregnancy, it was a chess move. Well, Mom said brightly. Let's clear the table and make some coffee. We need to celebrate. As chairs scooted back and plates started clinking again, Mallory stood and approached where I sat. She lowered her voice, but not enough that I couldn't hear the venom. Try not to spill anything this time, she whispered. I looked up at her. Looked. The girl who once shared a bedroom with me, who braided my hair when I had the flu, who snuck Pop-Tarts into our lunchboxes in 4th grade. She was still in there. But she was buried under so much performance and pride I didn't recognize her anymore. I'm not the one who spilled anything tonight, I said quietly. She blinked. Then I stood up. Not to storm off. Not to make a point. I just needed space. A room with no booties, no applause, no frosting-coated lies. I walked toward the back porch. The cold was a slap in the face I didn't know I needed. Behind me, the celebration carried on. Toasts. Coffee brewing. The scent of cinnamon. A perfect scene from a catalog. Except one person wasn't clapping. Grandma Quinn followed me out slowly, her steps careful on the old wooden floorboards. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood beside me and stared into the dark yard. Third one, huh? She said finally. I nodded. She always did love a stage. We both watched the snow fall in silence. I let the cold air settle in my lungs before I said a word. Grandma Quinn didn't press me. She never did. That's why I could talk to her. She did it on purpose, I said quietly. Grandma didn't flinch. Of course she did. Mallory's got a gift for choosing the most strategic moment to drop news. She made her pregnancy a weapon. Grandma blew on her hands, then tucked them under her shawl. You know what's worse than that? Everyone let her. That hit harder than I expected. Because it was true. Mom clapped. Dad smiled. Even Brandon looked relieved. I could have screamed, and nobody would have blinked. You ever think, I asked, that maybe I should have just stayed away? Grandma turned to me with eyes sharp as ever. You didn't come here for them. You came here for you. I didn't answer. The truth sat too heavy on my chest. She reached out and patted my hand. You held your tongue long enough, girl. Inside, the laughter picked up again. The sounds of coffee mugs, babies babbling, Mallory's voice rising like a homecoming queen making her speech. I stepped back in, and I didn't sit down this time. I walked to the edge of the living room, half in the dining room. The kids were opening some of the gifts now. Everyone was pretending that what happened an hour ago was just static. Hey, I said, loud enough to quiet the room. Jess looked up first, blinking. I need to say something. And it's not going to be cute or wrapped in a bow. Mallory shifted. Michael tensed. Mom froze, and the pie server was still in hand. I spent 3 years fighting in uniform overseas, and somehow, this house feels more like a battlefield than any place I've been. Silence. You could hear a pin dropper, Mallory's ego deflating. I came home with nightmares, panic attacks, guilt, and a permanent limp in my left leg. But what hurt more than anything was calling home and getting silence. Sending birthday cards that got ignored. Seeing my own sister post photos of family dinner with an empty seat where I should have been. Brandon lowered his head. Dad didn't move. I lost someone over there. Someone I loved. Laurel. She wasn't just a soldier. She was my friend. She wrote letters to her mom every week, no matter how hard it got. And when she died, I held her in my arms until the medics came. Her blood was on my hands. And not one of you knows that, because no one ever asked me about what I went through. I looked Mallory straight in the eyes. I came home early that Christmas to surprise you. I showed up with a gift in my hand and a broken heart in my chest. But you opened the door, saw me, and slammed it shut like I was a stranger. Mallory opened her mouth, but I didn't let her. I watched you hijack my college graduation dinner. I listened while you turned every phone call into a monologue about your kids. I stayed silent when you criticized my job, my apartment, my life. And even tonight, when I sat here sharing grief and pain, you stood up and made sure your baby announcement erased everything. Mom whispered, Marin, please. Number not this time. I turned to her, voice tight. You always said family comes first. But only if we fit your version of it. The daughter who followed the rules. Got married, stayed close, had babies. I went to war, and I came back changed. You didn't like that version of me, so you ignored her. Brandon finally spoke. Marin. Don't, I cut in. You watched it happen. You knew, and you said nothing. His face crumpled. Jess reached for his hand. I looked around the room, scanning each face. I'm not saying all this to ruin your holiday. I'm saying it because this house, this family, needs a reckoning. I won't sit quietly and let Mallory rewrite reality. Dad stood slowly, his jaw tight. You're right. Everyone looked at him. You're absolutely right, and I should have said it a long time ago. Even Mallory looked stunned. He walked over to me. You're not the problem, Marin. You never were. For once, Mom didn't argue. Her hand trembled as she set the pie server down. Mallory swallowed hard. You think I planned this to hurt you? I gave her a flat look. I don't think you care whether it hurt me or not. I'm your sister, she said, voice suddenly brittle. Then act like it. No yelling, no dramatics. Just 4 words that landed like a stone on glass. I walked back toward the tree and sat on the floor with Emma, who offered me one of her stickers like a peace treaty. I stuck it to my palm and smiled at her. Behind me, nobody moved. Mallory didn't say a word, but I could hear her footsteps leave the room like a retreat after a lost battle. Grandma had been quiet for most of the night but cleared her throat loud enough to make everyone freeze. She was still sitting at the table, her dessert untouched, one hand resting on her cane like she was ready to knock sense into someone. "Well," she said, voice sharp as broken glass. "I suppose we're all done pretending." Nobody moved. Dad looked like someone had just unplugged him. Mom straightened her spine as she used to when the church ladies came over. Brandon looked down at his hands like they might hold a script he forgot to memorize. "But Grandma?" Grandma turned to Mom and said, "Janet, you should have stepped in hours ago." Mom blinked like she didn't recognize her name. "I didn't want to cause a scene." "You didn't want to take sides," Grandma snapped. "But that door was a side, and you let Mallory slam it in her sister's face." I stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. Grandma was the one person I'd expected to stay neutral. Stoic. The glue, not the spark. Then she looked at me. "You know, I kept asking about you. Every Christmas, every birthday, I told your mother, 'Where's Marin?' But she said you were busy. That you liked the distance." My throat tightened. "And maybe you did," she added. "Maybe distance made it easier. Because the way this family treats you, I wouldn't come home either." Silence. Real, hard silence. Mom finally spoke, voice low, almost trembling. "I didn't mean for it to become like this." "No one ever does," Grandma said. "But meaning well doesn't count if you never act." Mallory wasn't in the room anymore, but her presence hung over everything like smoke after a fire. I sat down because my knees didn't feel like holding me up. And then I heard it. "I'm sorry," Mom said. I looked up. She looked at me, not at the floor, the pie, or Dad for backup. "I pushed too hard. I pushed you toward things you never wanted and made you feel like choosing something else was a rejection." I opened my mouth, but she kept going. "I see it now. You left, and we made it easy to stay gone. Then when you tried to come back, we didn't make space." "Not really." "But..." Grandma gave a satisfied grunt. "About damn time." Dad leaned forward, elbows on the table like he was bracing himself. "You've always been strong, Marin. Even as a kid, you didn't need hand-holding, so we stopped reaching for your hand at all." That landed harder than I expected. Then Brandon spoke. "You were the one who always fixed things, even when it wasn't your job. That night with Mallory in high school, the one where she got caught with Jason McCullough? You took the blame so she wouldn't get kicked off student council." I blinked. "You remember that?" "I never forgot," he said. "You were 17. You lied to Mom and Dad for her, and they grounded you. Mallory got to keep her sash and title, and you missed prom. I didn't say anything. I should have." I swallowed. The memory hit harder than I thought it would. Brandon looked at Mom. "She's been taking hits for this family for years." Mom pressed her lips together. "I wanted her to be resilient. Independent." "You got your wish," Grandma said. "But don't be surprised she learned to survive without you." The room felt heavy, but not in a bad way for once. Everyone was finally standing on the same planet again, breathing the same air. And then it hit me more complex than anything else that night. "Why was it me?" I asked. They looked at me. I wasn't even sure what I meant until the words came out. Why was I the one that had to be stronger? The one who had to leave? Why did I have to be the daughter who got out just to survive being part of this family? No one had an answer. So I stood up and walked toward the window, watching the snow pile up on the porch. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I just needed space. Behind me, Dad said quietly, "Because if it had been Mallory, she would have broken." And somehow, that made it worse. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Mallory had walked out because I broke the silence. I wasn't sure if she'd return, but I didn't care. People in this house were finally telling the truth for the first time in years. It didn't fix anything, but at least it stopped the pretending. I turned away from the window, wiped my face with my sleeve, and walked straight back to the table like I hadn't just cracked open everything. The air inside the room was thick. No one moved, like if they stayed perfectly still, they wouldn't have to acknowledge what just happened. Dad stood beside my chair, hand still resting on the back like he was waiting for permission to sit. I nodded slightly. He pulled it out for me again. Mallory had vanished, probably somewhere dramatic, like the bathroom mirror or the wine rack. Grandmother was still perched at the table like nothing had interrupted dessert, though her fork was held midair, a slice of pie barely touched. Brandon cleared his throat and pushed his plate forward an inch. "So, coffee, anyone?" Dad muttered. "Yeah, that sounds good," and retreated to the kitchen like a soldier walking into smoke. I sat down. Mom was still sitting across from me. Stiff, quiet, unblinking. Then, finally, she spoke. I didn't know she'd say that at the door. Her voice was calm. Too calm. That tone she used when she'd rather die than cry in front of anyone. The same tone she used when Grandma broke her hip. When Dad lost his job that winter, no one knew what to say when I came home from boot camp with a buzz cut and a medal. "I thought you were running late." I didn't know she'd say that. I looked at her, not saying anything. If I spoke, it might burn. Mom's hand touched the napkin's edge, folding it repeatedly like she needed something to control. "You think I never defended you? That I don't care about what you've done, where you've gone?" Her fingers were still twisting that napkin like it owed her something. I did care, I just didn't understand it. I kept my eyes on her, waiting. "When you left, I thought you were choosing a life without us. Like I wasn't enough. Like being your mother hadn't meant anything." Her voice cracked, just for a second. "And when you did well, when I heard about your promotions, your deployments, the awards, I told myself I should be proud. But I wasn't, I was." She stopped, took a breath. "I was angry. Because I gave up a job in DC once. When I was younger than you, got an offer at a nonprofit. Housing and everything. I didn't take it because I thought staying here, marrying your dad, teaching meant I was choosing the right kind of life." My stomach turned. I had never heard this. "You left and made that life work. The one I wanted but convinced myself I never needed. That's why I was hard on you. I wasn't trying to punish you. I was trying to shut up the part of me that wondered what I gave up." Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. I said nothing. She continued, "And Mallory? She knew I resented the fact that you got out. She played into it. Used it to be my favorite. I let her. I thought if one of my daughters stayed, it made up for the one who left. I finally spoke. I didn't leave to hurt you. I know that now." She looked up. But it took tonight to really see it. Behind us, we could hear mugs clinking, Dad and Brandon avoiding eye contact with each other while pretending the coffee maker needed 4 men to operate it. Mom sighed. "I don't know how to fix all of it, Marin. But I don't want to keep pretending nothing's broken." A long breath left my chest, like I'd been holding it since I parked the car outside. "I don't either," I said. And for once, we sat there without roles. No soldier. No teacher. No golden child or screw-up. Just people. 2 women who'd finally said what needed saying, even if it came late. Behind us, the coffee finished brewing, the smell filling the room, grounding it in something warm and human. Grandmother shifted in her chair and then tapped her spoon twice against her glass as if she were the room to order. Everyone froze. She didn't raise her voice, but when she spoke, the air shifted. "I've lived long enough to see each of you fail at something," she said, looking at each of us like we were back in grade school. "But pretending this family doesn't need fixing? That's the biggest failure of all." No one argued. Not even Mallory. Dad cleared his throat like he wanted to say something, then gave up and stared at his plate. Mallory stood up first. "I need a minute," she muttered, disappearing down the hallway. I figured that was it. But a few minutes later, she came back with her laptop. She sat across from me and didn't look up. "Can you help me with this?" she asked. I blinked. "With what?" "My resume," she said, opening a document that looked like it hadn't been updated since college. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You do. You're good at this." It was the most sincere thing she'd said to me in years. And it was weirdly disarming. I took a deep breath and scooted my chair closer. "All right," I said. "But we're fixing your formatting first." "Comic Sans? Really?" That earned a tiny laugh from her. We sat there for a while going through her work history, and slowly, the family started drifting back in like moths to a weird flame, curious, confused, and unsure of what they were witnessing. Brady leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Is this happening? Mallory shot him a look. Yes, and you can keep your sarcastic commentary to yourself. He raised his hands like he was surrendering. Hey, I'm just observing. But I haven't seen you two in the same room for more than 10 minutes since 2016. Mom finally sat down, sighing like she'd aged 10 years in one evening. This wasn't how I imagined tonight going, she said. You and me both, I muttered, still typing. I meant, she said slowly. I didn't expect you two to find common ground. Not like this. We're not singing Kumbaya, I said. We're just solving a practical problem. Well, Dad said, stepping in. Sometimes fixing the practical stuff is how bigger things get unstuck. There was a pause. It wasn't uncomfortable. Just new. Mom looked at me. I know I've been hard on you. That stopped my fingers mid-type. You think? I asked, only half joking. She didn't bristle. Yes, she said simply. And I think some of that came from my own fear. I didn't want you to end up like me. That's not an insult, she added, holding her hand. It's regret. I wanted to travel. I wanted to write, but then life happened, and I told myself I was better off without those dreams. Watching you live yours reminded me of what I gave up. It was easier to criticize you than admit I was jealous. I blinked at her. Did everyone drink truth serum or something tonight? She laughed. It took your little explosion to crack us all open. I didn't mean to explode, I said. No, Dad said. But it needed to happen. Sometimes peace is just a prettier version of denial. Mallory turned to me. I'm not going to apologize again for earlier. But I do want to do better. I think I forgot how to be a sister. I stared at her. And I forgot how to trust you. She nodded once. So what do we do with that? I shrugged. I don't know. Maybe we just start by not walking away every time it gets hard. Revolutionary idea, Brady muttered. Grandmother smacked the table with her palm. Enough talking. Let's take a photo. Before everyone goes back to pretending they're normal. Someone grabbed a phone, we squeezed in around the couch, and someone set the timer. I didn't smile the whole time. I didn't need to. The fact that we were all still in the same room felt like a damn miracle already. I stayed behind after the photo, brushing crumbs off the table while everyone drifted into their corners like fighters after a long match. The air still held that cinnamon and roast turkey warmth, but it was quieter now. No arguing, no glass clinks, just the low hum of the dishwasher, and the sound of my dad adjusting his belt like he'd just won a war with the sweet potato casserole. It had been a year since the night everything cracked wide open. This time, I walked up to the house without my stomach twisting into a pretzel. I didn't need to text Dad from the driveway or sit in the car rehearsing pleasantries. I rang the bell, and Mom answered it with her apron dusted in flour and a genuine smile, not the kind that said, "Be polite to your sister." Right on time, she said, stepping aside. There were new photos on the hallway wall. One of Kimberly and I are at the Seattle market, one of the grandmothers holding baby Thomas. And the biggest one in my army dress blues, standing in front of the flag at Laurel's memorial, my hand resting on her folded uniform. I didn't know they had that photo. I figured you should be up there too, Mom said behind me. I nodded once. Thanks. The kids tore through their stockings in the living room like they were chasing survival rations. Brandon was filming with one hand and passing out hot cocoa with the other. Jessica waved at me from behind the mountain of wrapping paper. Then Kimberly walked in. She was in jeans and a worn Christmas sweatshirt that said, "Elf off," hair in a messy bun, baby Thomas on her hip. No makeup, no rehearsed entrances, just real. Hey, she said, one arm already reaching out awkwardly for a half hug. Hey, I replied, bumping her shoulder gently. You look human. Sleep deprivation. Nature's concealer. We laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite kind people give before throwing another passive-aggressive jab. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like she was measuring me. We moved into the kitchen to help Mom, who handed me the rolling pin like it was a peace treaty. "You still remember how to roll out pie crust?" she asked. "Nope," I said. "But you'll remind me, like always." And she did. Less corrections, more encouragement. Less hovering, more letting me screw up the edges without making a face about it. Grandmother sat at the kitchen table with a whiskey neat and her cane propped against the radiator. She'd survived a minor stroke in the spring but was still sharp enough to point out Mom's crust was shrinking too fast. "I told you not to overhandle it," she muttered, smug. Kimberly joined us with a bag of groceries from the co-op. Organic everything. "I got the dairy-free butter you like," she told me. "Also grabbed those protein bars you said help with sleep." I figured after all that jet lag from San Diego. I blinked. "Thanks, that's really thoughtful." "Well, I figured I should use my stalking powers for good." We smiled again. Smaller this time, but easier. When we all sat down for dinner, it was chaos again, but not the toxic kind. The kids are just throwing peas, Thomas is wailing mid-toast, and Dad is misplacing the carving knife thrice. The kind of chaos that feels like home. During dessert, Kimberly leaned over and whispered, "Hey, I've been working on my resume. I was wondering if you could look at it sometime. There's a hybrid position opening up at a regional marketing office. 3 days a week. I think I might actually apply this time." I didn't tease her. Didn't make a joke. I just said, "Send it to me tonight. I'll help you polish it up." She nodded, then offered me the last slice of pie. Mom raised a glass before anyone could start packing up leftovers. "To second chances," she said. "To actually showing up," I added. Everyone clinked glass 7 grandmother, who thought toasts were for people who hadn't seen war or the Great Depression. I helped clean the dishes with Dad later, as we always used to. The same drying towel that had probably seen a Reagan-era Thanksgiving sat by the sink. He didn't say much, he just worked in his quiet way. But as he handed me a plate to dry, he said, "I'm glad you came back." "Me too," I said. And I meant it. As I hung the dish towel back on its hook, Dad nudged me gently with his elbow and nodded toward the porch. We stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The snow hadn't started again yet, but the sky was thick with promise. He handed me a mug of hot cider like it was some sort of peace offering. "Remember when we used to sneak out here during those awful extended family dinners?" he asked, settling onto the wooden bench. "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. "You used to pretend you were checking the lights, but really you just needed to breathe." He chuckled. "And you'd come out to help, even though you never once checked a bulb." I sat next to him, cider warming my hands. We looked out at the front yard, where the kids had built a lopsided snowman. Dad broke the silence first. "I didn't think we'd get here," he said. "I mean, not just you and meet this whole family. Last year, I thought we'd cracked right down the middle." "We did," I said. "Some cracks needed to happen." He nodded slowly. "You were brave, Marin. I've seen courage in combat, but emotional bravery? That's something else. You called it like it was." I stared down at the steam rising from my mug. I wasn't trying to make a statement, I just couldn't keep pretending anymore. For so long I thought distance was the answer. But then you called. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Your mom said you'd say no." "Well, she wasn't wrong. I almost did." He smiled. "But you didn't. And I'm glad." I looked at him. I'm glad too. Inside, I could hear laughter. Genuine laughter, not that tight, fake kind that used to hang in the air like smoke. This was messier, louder, more human. "You think it'll last?" I asked. He thought about it. "I think it'll be work, constant work. Therapy's helped, but you don't break patterns in one snowy night." "I know. But I also know I've got my daughter back," he said. "And that's worth every awkward conversation." Just then, the porch door opened. Mallory poked her head out. "You guys gonna freeze out here or come get some dessert?" Dad raised his mug. "We're having a moment." She rolled her eyes but smiled. Well, your moment's about to miss warm pie. I stood up and followed her inside. The warmth hit immediately, and cinnamon, vanilla, and something buttery were in the air. Grandma had taken up a post in the armchair with Thomas asleep on her lap, one hand still loosely wrapped around his socked foot like she didn't want to let go. Mallory handed me a slice of pie with the tiniest smirk. No competition, you're still the apple pie queen. I raised an eyebrow. Did you practice that in the mirror? Maybe. We sat on the couch, our knees brushing. Thomas let out a soft baby snore from across the room. You were right, by the way, she said. Last year. About all of it. I hated hearing it, but I needed it. I wasn't trying to be right, I said. Doesn't matter. You were. I used to think you were selfish. Turns out I was scared. You left and made a life. I stayed and made noise. I looked at her. You're making more than noise now. That job with the tourism board. She smiled. Only part-time, but I don't feel stuck anymore. That's new. That's huge. We clinked our forks in a mock toast. Across the room, Mom was wiping pie crumbs off Emma's face while giving Jessica instructions for the leftover containers. Brandon was showing Noah how to work the new RC truck. Michael was passed out in a recliner, mouth open. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later, when I stood by the door to grab my coat, Grandma waved me over. You going? She asked, eyes sharp under those woolly eyebrows. Just for tonight. I'll be back next weekend. She smiled. Good. Families don't fix overnight. But showing up? That's half the work. Thanks, Grandma. She squeezed my hand. You did the hard thing, sweetheart. You told the truth. As I stepped onto the porch again, the cold no longer stung the same. I looked back through the window. They were cleaning up, arguing about Tupperware sizes and fighting over the last slice like nothing catastrophic had happened. And maybe that was the point. We weren't fixed. Not by a long shot. But we were finally free. I drove away that night with pie in the passenger seat and no weight in my chest. The road was slick, quiet, and lined with soft snow that looked more peaceful than lonely. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. I felt like I was carrying something with me. Not anger, not guilt, just the truth. We hadn't solved everything. We probably never would. But we stopped pretending. We started listening. And that was enough to breathe again. I wasn't the broken one anymore. I was just part of the mess, same as everyone else. And honestly, that felt like home. If stories like this hit close to home, messy family drama, second chances, and a little bit of quiet revenge, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. More real-life revenge stories and raw family drama are coming your way. And hey, don't forget to leave a comment if this one spoke to you. We read every single one.